Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Sunday night video. This week I'm covering the very sad and tragic case of Samuel Smith and the attempted murder of Thomas Blair, which took place in the Mitford area of Morpeth in 1870. This is a slightly different story to the ones I usually cover, so you might find it is written in a little bit different way. And I would just also like to add that Mitford itself is quite a difficult place to get photos of. However, I did visit Mitford a couple of times in the past, so I do have some photos of my own. So some of the photos may be a little more up to date than usual, but I hope you will still find the story interesting. Samuel Smith was born in around 1810 in Northumberland. His parents are unknown. He would later move to the Mitford area of Morpeth and married a lady by the name of Margaret. Margaret had been married before and had a daughter called Agnes, who became Samuel's stepdaughter, also taking his name. Samuel worked as an agricultural labourer for the Mitford family and lived in a cottage fairly close to Mitford Church. However, by 1870, Samuel was no longer working, and although he had been allowed to stay in his cottage for a while, he had been told recently that his family would have to leave by Thomas Blair. This would quite possibly have been to make way for a new family to move into the cottage. Thomas Blair, the victim, was born in Mitford in around 1809. His parents are unknown. He married Mary Thompson in around 1840 in Morpeth, and the couple had at least 3 children together. Thomas worked as a farmer and also a land agent on the Mitford estate. Neither of the men involved in this week's case were described as heavy drinkers. Before we go any further, can I just say, if you do find this video interesting, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content that we create. It really is very much appreciated. And it is completely free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you any money, but it really does help to support the channel. And I would just like to add, as I always do, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify. So I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. On Saturday, December the 3rd, 1870, Thomas Blair set off from his home in Mitford at around 11 a.m. to head on horseback into Morpeth. This was something he did on a regular basis and was all part of his job. And the village of Mitford was quite a small place, and most people knew the daily routines of others. As Thomas was passing the bridge near Mitford, a shot rang out. It appeared to come from some bushes close by. The person who fired the gun was not immediately visible, as he had hidden himself quite well. 3 other men, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Joblin and Mr. Swan, were close by at the time, and on hearing the gunshot they all looked towards Thomas Blair, and they saw his horse rearing up, then begin to head towards them. Thomas was still clinging to the horse, and as he got closer to the 3 men, they saw that he was bleeding badly and his hat was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Thompson spotted Thomas's hat on the ground a little distance back and went to pick it up. As he did so, he saw a man run out from the bushes near to where Thomas had been shot. He shouted out for him to stop, but the man took no notice and kept running towards the bridge. Mr. Swan began to run after him, and as the man reached the bridge, Mr. Swan saw him place the gun on the ground, climb over the edge and jump into the water. Mr. Swan looked over the side but could see no sign of the man. Mr. Thompson helped Thomas Blair back to his home in Morpeth and Mr. Swan went to Morpeth to find a doctor. Another man who had been in the area, Mr. Herdman, went to find some help to look for the man in the river. He was able to attract the attention of 2 men working on the road and of Mr. Ashton of the woolen mill. It had taken around half an hour to find help, and by the time the man in the river had been found, he was already dead. Dr. Patton was there when his body was found, and he identified him as being Samuel Smith of Mitford. Dr. Rose went to the home of Thomas Blair. He found him to have several wounds to his head and body, including some shot which had gone into his chest and arm. However, he was not seriously injured and it was thought that he would recover well. Thomas was told that the man who had attempted to kill him was Samuel Smith, and he was also told that he had died. The only question now was why had he shot him and then taken his own life. An inquest on the body of Samuel Smith was held at Mitford on the Saturday afternoon before Coroner Cockcroft. Although it is not stated, it appears that Samuel was identified by his stepdaughter Agnes. Samuel's wife does not appear to have given any evidence at all. It was stated at the start of the inquest that Samuel, until around 1868, had worked for Mrs. Mitford. He had been employed to do jobs such as chopping firewood and raking leaves, etc. However, when Mrs. Mitford had died, Samuel, along with most of the other men at the hall, had been discharged from their jobs. Samuel's cottage was tied to his job, but he had not been asked to leave and had remained there ever since. He does not seem to have taken any further full-time work. However, it was said that he was not poor and did have money to live on, taking jobs as and when he needed them. And just a few weeks before his attack on Thomas, he'd been asked to move out of the cottage. It was also stated that on the morning of December the 3rd, Samuel had gone to another village close to Mitford where he was to do a morning's work on a nearby farm. However, the weather had been very bad that morning and the work could not be done, so Samuel had headed into Morpeth, and it was there that he had gone into the shop belonging to Mr. King of Morpeth and asked to buy a gun. The gun had cost Samuel £3.10, and he had tried to get it cheaper, but in the end he had paid the price freely and had also bought some shot, powder and caps. Mr. King gave evidence at the inquest where he stated that Samuel had told him he wanted the gun as protection for his house. Mr. King said Samuel appeared fine to him. He did not seem upset or angry in any way. However, he didn't think that he was used to using guns, as the gun had had to be taken apart so that he could carry it in his bag, and he said Samuel had paid close attention to how the gun should be put back together so that he could use it later. Robert Herdman of North Shields said he had been in Mitford at around 10:30 a.m. on the morning of the 3rd of December. He said he had seen the man, who he now knew to be Samuel Smith, in Mitford. He was standing in the field near the bridge. He said Samuel had his hands in his pockets and he did not see any sign of a gun. Robert said he thought it looked as though Samuel was waiting for someone, and he assumed he may have been poaching, as he did not know Samuel before this, as he did not live in the area. Robert said he met Mr. Blair a few yards up the road. He was on his horse, trotting at a slow pace. He did not say if he spoke to him or not, but he said that Thomas carried on up the road a little way, where he met with Mr. Swan and Mr. Thompson. Robert did not mention seeing Mr. Joblin. He said Thomas stopped and spoke with the two men for a few moments, then carried on his way. Robert said he was walking behind him when he heard the sound of a gunshot. He then heard one of the other men shouting at someone who had come out of the bushes. He said he saw Samuel heading for the bridge and he saw him place the gun down before he jumped over the side into the water. Robert said that he could see that Thomas was injured, so he went to find assistance. He said he found two men working on the roads and also found Mr. Ashton, and they all came back to the scene with him. He said Thomas had been taken home, so they searched for Samuel in the river. He said they spotted him beside a grate, and the workmen found a rake and were able to pull him towards them and out of the water. Dr. Patton of Morpeth had been in the area at the time, and he pronounced Samuel dead at the scene. He had been in the water for around 25 minutes at the time. Thomas Ashton of Mitford gave similar evidence to that of Robert Herdman, adding that he had known Samuel Smith for around 20 years. He said he had seen him around a week before the incident, and he seemed to be his usual self. He did not seem to be in a depressed state. Neither the two road workers or Mr. Joblin appear to have given any evidence at the inquest. Agnes Appleby said Samuel was her stepfather. She said she had been to his home in Mitford the week before his death. He had been very quiet and did not want to talk. She said he had seemed to be in low spirits for quite some time. She felt it began after the death of Mrs. Mitford and the loss of his job. When he was recently told that he needed to leave his cottage, he had become even more depressed. However, she said she had never heard him say anything bad about Thomas Blair, or make any threats on his life. John Appleby said Agnes was his wife, and he had also seen Samuel around a week ago, and he felt that he had been quite depressed. No further evidence was given, and I found no details of the coroner summing up. The jury, who retired for a very short time, returned the verdict that Samuel had taken his own life during a moment of temporary insanity. The reason for his attack on Thomas Blair remained a mystery. Reports in the papers at the time said it was felt that Samuel was not in financial trouble, as he had been seen with money and had paid for the gun without any problems, and similar to the reasoning behind his death, it was felt that he had made the attempt on Thomas during a moment of temporary insanity. I did not find any evidence of a funeral for Samuel Smith. However, I would imagine he was buried in the churchyard at Mitford. Sadly, this may well have been a case of a pauper's funeral, as although it was suggested that he had money, it seems his family did not, as the money that would have usually been paid to the jury and the witnesses, which amounted to £1.06, was given to Samuel's widow. I did not find any evidence of a headstone for Samuel anywhere in the area. Thomas Blair did take a little turn for the worse in the days after he'd been shot. However, in just a few short weeks he had recovered well. He continued on with his life as a farmer and land agent in Mitford for several more years. However, by 1891 he was simply listed as a farmer. Thomas died in December of 1896 at the age of around 88, and he left a considerable sum to his family, around almost £8,000, and he is buried in the churchyard at Mitford. This is one of those cases where nothing seems to make much sense. Samuel is not described as a drinker and seems to have been a good worker until Mrs. Mitford died. He then seems to have lost his job and drifted from one temporary job to another. However, he seems to have been doing fine and had been allowed to stay in his home, even though his cottage does seem to have been tied to the workers of the Mitford estate. It's not clear why he was asked to leave the cottage. I have made the assumption that it was to house someone who did work for the estate, but Thomas never gave any evidence to explain this. It does seem that this is the point where Samuel became depressed. His family did notice some changes in his behaviour, but those of the area did not, perhaps because he was able to hide his depression from them. It appears that the loss of his home had upset him a lot more than anyone thought, and as Thomas had been the one to ask him to leave, he maybe wanted to take out his anger on him. Although the papers stated he had taken his own life because he had failed to kill Thomas, I actually think he may have planned to do that anyway, as he did not know for sure that Thomas would live or die after he had shot him. I think he simply had no desire to spend the rest of his life in prison, no matter what the outcome was of his attempt on Thomas's life. I feel this truly is a sad case of Samuel simply being so upset at the loss of his home that he really was of unsound mind at the time he bought the gun and tried to kill Thomas Blair. It is doubtful to me that this was something that could have been avoided, unless, of course, Samuel had been allowed to remain in the cottage for the rest of his life. So I believe that the jury were correct when they suggested Samuel was suffering from temporary insanity at the time of his death. But what do you think? Do you think losing his home was simply the last straw for Samuel and he lashed out in anger? Or do you think there was more to Thomas asking him to leave than we have been told? Do you think Samuel really did have money, or do you think it took his last penny to buy the gun, especially as he did try to get the price lowered? Do you think the jury were correct to find Samuel of unsound mind at the time of his death, and do you think there was any way to have avoided this whole sad story? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this very sad and tragic story interesting. As said at the start, it is a little different to normal, and there is no punishment by law, as Samuel had already punished himself. I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do look forward to seeing you all again next week.